The first time the town called her a liar, it happened in the middle of Sunday morning when the bells of Grace Hollow rang over the dust and fields, and every decent soul was supposed to be thinking about forgiveness. Not judgment, but judgment came anyway, sharp and unanimous, as if it had been waiting for her all along. And Mara Bell stood alone on the courthouse steps with her hands shaking, and her voice cracking as she told them what had happened out on the ranch, beyond the cottonwoods, how the night air had smelled like iron and rain, how the fence gate had been open when it was always locked, how she had seen the lantern glow near the south barn and heard a man's voice she recognized but did not dare name, and how what followed changed her forever. Yet the crowd only shifted and murmured and looked past her as though truth itself were inconvenient, and somewhere near the back, leaning against the rail with his hat pulled low, stood Eli Carter, the largest rancher in 3 counties, a man whose word could end arguments before they began. And he said nothing, not when the sheriff cleared his throat, not when the preacher frowned, not when the women whispered that Mara had always been troubled, and not when the men decided it was easier to believe a girl was lying than to imagine the rot might be closer to home. Because Eli Carter had learned long ago that silence could be safer than honesty, especially when honesty threatened to tear down everything he had built with calloused hands and quiet sacrifices. And so Mara was dismissed with a warning about spreading stories, and the town moved on as towns do. But the lie they accused her of telling became a shadow that followed her. Through the market, through the schoolhouse where she cleaned floors, through the nights when sleep refused to come, while Eli returned to his ranch where the cattle lowed and the wind moved through, the grass like confession trying to escape. And every time he passed the south barn, his jaw tightened. Because he knew what Mara had seen was real, he knew because he had seen it too once, years earlier, and had chosen the same thing he chose. Now silence, believing that burying the truth was the only way to protect his land, his name, and the fragile peace of a town that could not survive another scandal. But peace built on denial rots from the inside, and the rot began to show when Mara disappeared one evening on her way home, leaving only her shawl by the creek and a question no one wanted to ask except Eli, who found himself riding out into the dark with a lantern in his hand and a weight in his chest that no amount of silence could quiet. And as the wind rose and the town slept, he realized the truth was no longer content to stay buried. And if this story already has its grip on you, if you feel that tightening in your chest, then stay with it, because this is the moment where everything begins to break. And stories like this only reach the people who need them when you subscribe and keep listening. They found Mara alive but broken in the ravine beyond the old grazing line, her eyes dull with the knowledge that the truth had cost her more than lies ever could. And when the town gathered again, this time under a sky heavy with storm clouds, something had shifted, because fear had replaced certainty, and questions had begun to crack the foundation of their shared denial. And Eli Carter stood among them, feeling the walls closing in, knowing the truth no longer belonged to him to withhold, because the man Mara had finally named between sobs and silence was someone the town trusted, someone protected by reputation and proximity, and the unspoken rule that powerful men were not to be questioned. And the sheriff looked to Eli then, because Eli had seen things. Eli always knew more than he said, and the silence that once protected him now strangled him. And in that moment he understood the terrible price of saying nothing for too long. Because when he finally spoke, when he told them about the night years ago, about the lantern, about the screams he pretended were coyotes, about the blood he washed, from the barn floor before dawn, the town turned on him not with gratitude, but with fury. Because truth does not feel like salvation at first, it feels like betrayal, and Eli lost everything in a single afternoon. His contracts pulled, his land condemned, his name dragged through the same dirt Mara had crawled through alone. And as the storm broke and rain turned the ground to mud, the man responsible was taken away, screaming innocence just as Mara once had. And the town was left standing in the wreckage of what their disbelief had cost, while Eli walked away from the ranch he loved, knowing that silence had not spared him. It had only delayed the inevitable, and years later, when this story is told around fires and through screens, it is not remembered as a tale about a liar, but as a warning about what happens when truth is ignored until it demands payment in blood and loss. And if you're still here, if this story made you angry or moved or unsettled, then you understand why stories like this matter, why they must be told and shared, and why subscribing isn't just support. It's a way to make sure voices like Mara's are never drowned out again.